Hello, Petal. How you doing? How are you getting on? I was just thinking, and please humour me on this one, if you could just put a little emoji in the comments or drop me a line just to let me know you're okay. I was just thinking, I haven't seen a couple of you and I just wanted to make sure everybody was all right. So it's just reaching out, touching base. I hope you're all okay. Sending all love and strength to everybody, especially this time of year, because it does go on beyond the holidays. So if you could just drop me a little emoji, let me know you're all right, and that would be awesome. Only if you've got the time, that would be fantastic. Yes. So anyway, that's the housekeeping out the way. But yeah, I was thinking about that. You know how you do. We have Bolt and Davros with us today, so if they do make any noises, I do apologise, but it's just because they've been having a bit of a rough time since their little brother went on a different journey in life. Yes, he went to the Rainbow Bridge and they've been just having a bit of a rough time, so they can join today. Hopefully the sound quality has improved further. I have sorted out the audio setup again and invested in a new microphone filter. Well, it's not a filter, it's a little cube that goes around your microphone, and it's a more compact soundproofing a more compact soundproofing solution. That's what they normally use on QVC, isn't it? This is your best soundproofing solution that you can buy. You've got a mop and it's your best cleaning solution. Yes, I know, Bolt. See, Bolt will be giving his opinion now and again. He's got one of those wonderful meows. It's like a duck quack. It doesn't have an echo, but it cuts right through you, right to your soul. It doesn't it? Yes. Are you going to be a quiet boy while I'm recording? No? Okay. There you go. He's such a good boy, aren't you? So he has been with me for 13 years. He was the third cat ever that I got. He's currently climbing onto my shoulders and he will be directing the performance, I believe. He is having a bit of a workout right now, but he's not allowed on the keyboard because that doesn't help anybody. But he wants lappy time, and that's fine. Yes, I know. So you might get interspersions, but this is a one-off just because they need a little bit of extra care right now. Normally I would leave them outside the recording room, just while I'm doing this, but right now they need to. Yes, you do, don't you? I know. You're going to help me record, eh? He doesn't want to sit on the other stool. He has to sit on my shoulders. So, yeah, apologies for this. Come on, fella. Go on, sit on your stool. There you go. Good boy. Right, let's try this again. So thank you for indulging me and my wafflings. I do appreciate it. Please let me know how you are in the comments as ever. If you're not really feeling like having a bit of a chat, if you could just leave an emoji, that would be awesome. Just let me know that you're all right out there. And we shall get on with chapter 15 of Here Comes the Sun by our beloved Mr. Tom Holt. Sod, said Bjorn. He twisted uncomfortably round and tried to see what had grabbed hold of his leg. The part of him that still occasionally harboured optimism hoped that it would turn out to be a smiling blonde air hostess. It was in fact a man-trap. Close, but no cigar. It was a fairly humane man-trap, it has to be said. The jaws weren't lined with inch-long steel spikes, and in fact they were padded with foam rubber and covered with chamois leather. There was also a notice, probably insisted upon by the administration's hyper-paranoid legal advisers, engraved in tiny letters on the trap's upper mandible, that read, "Caution, this trap may be dangerous to elderly or disabled persons. Members of the public are advised that they get caught in it entirely at their own risk." Bjorn grunted and tried prising the jaws apart with what was left of his axe. There was, of course, a man-trap opening attachment on his Zambian army knife, but he'd broken that a day or so ago, trying to cut into a pat of hot butter. Overhead, the beams of many searchlights were producing a complex and geometrically satisfying display which, combined with the blaring of sirens and the thundering noise of many speakers playing back tapes of barking Rottweilers, added up to one of the most original son et lumière performances in cosmic history. He had to be there, of course. Bjorn was, and he wished he wasn't. The axe handle, seasoned hickory, groaned accusingly and splintered without shifting the jaws of the trap at all. The torches waving about in the distance wouldn't be in the distance for very much longer. What to do? Gotcha! A light shined right into Bjorn's eyes, and he automatically shied away from it, raising his hands to shield said eyes. He had enough problems as it was, he felt, without having great big blobs of yellow custard clutching up his retina for the next 5 minutes. "All right, chummy," said a voice from behind the light source. "Throw down the gun. Easy now." Bjorn sighed. It was gonna be one of those nights. He could just tell it. "How?" he said. "I haven't got one." The torch beam didn't blink exactly, but there was a sort of sympathetic modulation in the flow of photons as its owner registered surprise. "But you're a dangerous intruder," he said. "Yeah," Bjorn replied sourly. "Looks like it, doesn't it?" The torch came closer. "So what are you armed with, then?" the trooper inquired curiously. "Bombs? Gas grenades? Flamethrower?" "No." The torch beam wavered again. "Don't believe you," said the voice behind it. "Come on, you're going to be on with something. Nobody breaks into an armed compound, a high-security compound, without something." Bjorn considered. Yes, he did, Bolt. You see, this is the problem with having cats in your room when you're trying to record. I digress. Bjorn considered. "I've got a buzzed penknife, a broken axe handle, and a pair of socks," he said. "Now, could you see your way to getting this fucking thing off my leg before it stops my circulation completely, please?" The trooper hosed Bjorn down with the torch from head to foot, reached out, pulled his feet out from under him, and knocked him silly with the rim of his own steel helmet. Then he grabbed the man's rifle and used its barrel to force apart the jaws of the trap. It wasn't easy even then. By the time he'd finished, he was holding the only rifle in the cosmos capable of shooting directly behind the person firing it. Essential equipment for self-defence in the corporate jungle. So true. Pausing only to stuff the socks in the recumbent trooper's mouth and steal his packed lunch, Bjorn jumped to his feet, winced, and ran off into the darkness. Behind him, very close now, he could hear the blood-curdling baying of quadraphonic Dolby hounds, with the occasional crackle. Something materialised in front of his face, and he ran straight into it. If the way he rebounded like a tennis ball and sat down with sparks coming out of his ears was anything to go by, it was quite possibly an electric fence. He forced himself to stop vibrating, picked up a handful of spent volts out of his eyebrows, and blinked 4 times. This was heavy stuff. Whatever it was they'd got in that shed, they didn't want anybody else to know about it, which was odd, considering that it was hoisted up into the sky every morning where everybody on Earth could see it. Psst! Bjorn lifted his head, spat out an amp and peered into the darkness. "Over here." "Why?" Bjorn inquired. The darkness hesitated. "Look," it hissed. "Do you want to be rescued or not?" "Depends," Bjorn replied. "Who are you?" "Tom sent me." "Oh." Suddenly a great light dawned in Bjorn's mind. Figuratively speaking, of course. Otherwise light would have seeped out through his ears and given the troopers something to shoot at. "Oh, right. I'm coming." "This way," hissed the voice. From the way it expressed itself exclusively in whispers and hisses, it was either the tutelary spirit of a cracked gas main or a chatty snake. But if it was a friend of Dop's, that didn't really matter much. Dop was a sort of bloke you could really trust. From where Jane was sitting, wearing the great halo of noise and vibration like a hairdryer, it looked like a giant millipede in day-glow socks. The more you looked at it, the less you actually made out. Everything just seemed to melt into a continuum of twinkling red and white light. She switched on the intercom. "It's very pretty," she said. "What is it?" The pilot's laugh bounced around inside her headphones. "It's the main stretch of the Renaissance bypass between junctions 16 and 17, he replied. "Want to take a closer look?" "OK," Jane replied, and the helicopter slowly lost height. As they closed in, the continuum became marginally less continuous. It looked less like a fibre optic cable with indigestion and more like the patterns of millions of tiny dots of light, each close behind the other, each moving so slowly that you had to stare quite hard to perceive any motion at all. "Fine," Jane said. "It's a traffic jam." "Almost," the pilot replied, "but not quite. Going in closer." Lower still, and the millions of tiny dots broke up into vague but very distinct shapes, like a newspaper photograph under an extremely powerful magnifying glass. They reminded Jane of something. Cars, to be precise, and lorries and motorcycles and vans. But it was only a similarity. They were palpably vehicles. But there the resemblance ended. "What are those things?" Jane asked. "Lives," the pilot replied. "No, that's not strictly true. If we're going to be all technical and correct, they're presents." "Presents?" "That's right. And before you ask where's the wrapping paper and cards, I mean presents as opposed to pasts and futures, OK?" Jane frowned. I don't think I... "Well, you wouldn't, would you?" the pilot replied. "I mean, you're down there somewhere. Part of you is, anyway." So low now that each individual thing was plainly distinguishable from the mass, even if it didn't look at all like anything Jane had ever seen before. Try and imagine one of those old Heinkel bubble cars that suddenly come to life, and you may be able to creep into the corner of the same frame of reference. "See the sign up ahead," said the pilot. "There's a clue for you." Jane peered forward. Despite the pitch darkness above her, she could see reasonably well at ground level, thanks to the lights of the things. There was, indeed, a sign, very much like a road sign. I can't quite... And then she could. It was an awkward moment. It read, "Department of Time, T49 Creation Doomsday Expressway. Renaissance bypass now open, another century completed. Ahead of schedule by Eli Timestone plc." At Jane's request, the helicopter climbed higher until the continuum reappeared and the individual lights merged once more with the general floor. "That's one of the good bits," the pilots were saying. "It's the bit they show in the reports. Further on, where the whole bloody thing's falling to pieces, it's not quite so pretty." It's supposed," the pilot continued, "to be like continuous. Time like an ever-rolling stream and so forth. Well, that's the theory." Jane swallowed hard and tried to fool herself into believing that the heaving in her stomach was something to do with the way the helicopter was rocking about in the thermals. "I see," she lied. "Doesn't work like that, of course," the pilot went on remorselessly. "I mean, it's becoming a joke. If it's not a whole carriageway coned off because they're repairing the membranes of the space-time continuum, then it's resurfacing, which means contraflows, of course." "Contraflows," Jane repeated. "Bloody horrible things," the pilot said, nodding. "Just up there, between junctions 19 and 20. They've rerouted all 5 lanes of the past-bound carriageway onto the hard shoulder of the future-bound, and they expect it to work." The pilot took one hand off the joystick, felt in his pocket, and found a stick of chewing gum. "No wonder you get hold-ups," he said. "Hold-ups," Jane said. "In time. It can be a real bummer," the pilot agreed. "Not to mention the confusion. I mean, there you are, quietly edging your way through the first few decades of the 16th century, and you look over your shoulder and see all these blokes in bomber jackets and flared jeans and status quo t-shirts zipping along past you on the inside. Now, I'm not at all surprised some of them freak out and try and cut across the lanes." A red light flicked on, just below the fuel gauge, and started to flash alarmingly. The pilot put his fingers in his mouth and then reached out and put a blob of chewing gum over it. "I haven't the foggiest idea what that light's for," he commented. "In the manual it just says emergency." Jane opened her eyes. Somehow or other, they'd come to be shut, and she nerved herself to look down. It was like hell. There was no point in her trying to fool herself with similes now that she actually knew what it was. There didn't really seem to be much gained from trying to compare it with something it wasn't. But the hold-ups, she repeated doggedly, in time. The pilot chuckled. I bet you thought time always travelled the same speed, he said. Well, now you know. Jane felt her jaw sag, as if someone had cunningly managed to whip all the bone out of it without her feeling a thing. It doesn't, she said. Course not, the pilot replied. I mean, it's supposed to, sure, that's what the speed limits are for. But does anyone take any notice? Do they hellers like, and they call that progress? Jane started thinking about that one, but her brain wouldn't bite on it. Do you mean it used to be different before? She hazarded. No, the pilot said. They call it progress. That's the word they use for it. Or sometimes they call it innovation, or the relentless force of socio-political development. What they mean by that is some flash bugger in a souped-up cafe racer doing a ton down the outside lane. Doesn't half screw things up when that happens, I can tell you. That's if he's on the past-bound carriageway, the pilot added conversationally. Because then he's going from the future into the past. If he's on the other side of the road, of course, he's a rabid reactionary trying to turn the clock back. Either way, if he gets done, he loses his licence automatically, and a bloody good thing too. The calm, unflappable part of Jane's mind sorted out the words necessary for her to ask the pilot to confirm that it was possible for people to travel from the future into the past. The rest of her mind switched off the lights, looked up and went for a coffee. She closed her eyes, but it didn't seem to help. Can we get this straight? Jane asked. There's people going from the past to the future. Yes, I can handle that, I think, but people going from the future to the... The pilot turned his head and gave her a bit of a funny look. Yes, he said. I'm sorry, Jane replied, feeling rather as if she had a wet sock in her mouth. Is that possible? It's more than possible, the pilot said. It's absolutely essential. Can you imagine the mess you'd have up on the top end if they didn't? Jane said nothing. The wet sock had become the last sock of all, the one you find wedged in a crevice in the back of the drum of the washing machine 3 days after you did the actual wash. The pilot seemed to sense the difficulty she was having, for he changed his tone of voice down a gear and spoke just a little bit more slowly. Look, he said, you're immortal, right? You've got all that blood stuff sloshing about inside you. Well, think what would happen if all the blood only went in one direction. You'd get a sodding great build-up in your feet, and the rest of you would, well... Anyway, think of it like that, if you can. Presents circulate in the same way. Now, if they didn't, the past would go to sleep. You'd have pins and needles right up your racial collective subconscious. See what I mean? You mean, Jane replied, with extreme caution, that people keep going round and round in circles, forever and ever? The pilot scratched his nose with the heel of his hand. Well, he said, I suppose you could put it like that. It's more your classic river analogy, really, but I didn't want to explain it that way because it's such an awful cliché. You've got your river, right? Which river? Oh, any river. Rain falls in the mountains, it collects and runs across the plain in a river to the sea evaporates and falls as rain on the mountains. Now, you see? No. Fair enough. The pilot's voice seemed very, very far away, and somehow, or perhaps it was very long ago rather than very, very far away. Anyway, he said, I gather that you're going to help us sort it all out. I bloody well hope so, he added. It needs it. It is impossible to explain the operation of time simply, especially if you're trying to fly a helicopter as well. Attempting to understand the way it works purely from a verbal description is, well, it's like learning to play mahjong without a mahjong set. It just cannot be done. I mean, narrator's not. It's hard enough when you have got a set, let alone when you haven't got a set, but just saying. Instead, Look back down the carriageway to a point where the two streams of light eventually merge into one, then zoom in and close and stare. And this is time coming into operation. On a day when it's really slashing down, with the mud bubbling up around the ankles of the extremely self-conscious party of worthies in sodden grey suits and yellow plastic hard hats, standing around a length of damp pink ribbon stretched half-heartedly across the shining tarmac. "Gives me very great pleasure," Staff is saying, as the rain drips off the peak of his hat onto his tie, "to declare this astro-temporal expressway well and truly open." He reaches for the pair of scissors on the velvet cushion, and as his fingers make contact, he's making a very quick assessment of the whole idea and thinking, yes, but... He's thinking, OK, the old system worked, but that's not to say it's going to carry on working. What with the vast increase in time use expected in the next 5 million years? It's got to make sense to do it this way. Join it at the Big Bang and then straight through to the other end without having to stop for anything. Absolutely no risk of anybody getting lost in the Industrial Revolution or taking the wrong turning at the fall of Constantinople. And so he cuts the tape. And in that fraction of a second between the two blades of the scissors meeting and the severed ends of the tape falling away, he thinks, well, we all make mistakes. Because before they built the expressway, it worked. It shouldn't have, of course. It should have been absolute chaos. Instead of a straight line joining the two ends of the universe, there was a maze of single carriageways and winding little lanes creeping on its tortuous way from one crucial event to the next, completely haphazard, uncoordinated and unplanned. Rather like history itself. The traveller had to get off the ferry, thread his way through the back alleys of prehistory to get onto the Neolithic ring road, pootle around that to the big roundabout on the outskirts of the Bronze Age, take the second turning on the left, otherwise he'd find himself evolving back into an ape, for the long drag across 1,000 years of flat, boring timeways with no chance of overtaking till he got onto the downhill straight into the Roman Empire. Then he'd be faced with the sheer hell of cutting across the city traffic, and you know what the traffic's like in Rome these days. Well, it's actually improved out of all recognition. Before taking the last exit for the gearbox-numbing journey through the Middle Ages, uphill all the way, stuck behind a succession of slow-moving ecclesiastical long vehicles, only to find himself confronted with the brain-twisting complexity of the 16th century flyover network. Anything has got to be better than that. Wrong. So wrong, in fact, that after the first of the disastrous multiple pile-ups on the future-bound carriageway of the T7, there was a full interdepartmental inquiry. Needless to say, it never actually published any findings, but it leaked like a 6-month-old torch battery, and the unauthorised disclosures made alarming reading. For a start, because the route was now so straight, everyone was travelling far too fast. Apart from the drastically increased risk of collisions, this meant that travellers were getting from one end of the universe to the other in at least half the time, often less, with the result that at the other end, where they have this really amazing set of traffic lights, the size and mass of the tailback was threatening to destabilise the equilibrium of eternity. Quite apart from there only being 3 operational toilets in the cafe in the last lay-by. Unless something was done, there was going to be trouble. So, very reluctantly, the administration decided there was nothing for it but to send the whole of them back the way they'd come. Now, the idea wasn't intrinsically bad. Instead of everyone trying to squash through the exit gates at once, there would be a filter system. Any travellers who couldn't get through would be sent back round in a gigantic loop down the past-bound carriageway to the start, and then they'd turn back up at the future-bound side and have another shot at getting through the gates. It was a sort of holding pattern, with presents circling in the system until they got clearance to leave. But with the panic of getting the past-bound carriageways built before the fabric of space and time got seriously bent, nobody had the leisure to think the project through, with the result that the awful consequences of having the same traveller driving along the same route 2 or 3 times at the same time, in 2 or 3 different instalments, if you like, they weren't appreciated until it was too late. Reports of travellers on their second circuit driving too fast on the outside lane and running into the back of themselves still in their first circuit came as a complete and horribly unwelcome surprise. The difficulties over the insurance claims alone were enough to put a permanent kink in causality. Each attempted solution led to further and worse problems. The idea of a speed limit was one of the least inspired. The sort of travellers who obeyed the speed limit were the sort who already caused the havoc by dawdling on the inside, still faffing about in the Reformation when they should have been on the other side of Napoleon, for example. While the tearaway element who were causing the problem simply ignored it. Putting sleeping policemen across the carriageway at notorious temporal black spots did no good at all, particularly when policemen started waking up. Narrator's note, did you see those sleeping policemen that had a particular mechanism which was connected to the mechanism in police cars? So that basically when people were driving around going rah, 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 and having chases and everything, that when it sensed the police car coming along, it went down. And when it sensed like the police car had gone by, it went back up again. I thought it was really clever. Anyway. Meanwhile, what with everyone driving around the system 2 or 3 or even 4 times more than originally intended, the carriageways themselves began to crack up. The tarmac simply couldn't stand it. Now, it's no frickin' potholes. Extensive frost damage along the entire length of the Ice Age didn't exactly help, and it wasn't long before any one time up to a third of the entire system was cordoned off for repair, causing the worst problems yet. Discontented travellers began making their own unofficial exits off the expressway back onto the old disused network of lanes and byways, with the result that they got to the exit long before anybody else, and themselves included. As a panic measure, the administration introduced a number of diversions to get the traffic moving again, which meant that any number of crucial moments in history turned out not to have happened at all. The Trojan War, the reign of King Arthur, the golden age of English cricket, all suddenly ceased to ever have existed, with side effects that defied calculation. One rather sad knock-on effect of all of this was that staff oversaw and foresaw the whole ghastly mess just as he cut through the ceremonial ribbon. It would perhaps have been some consolation for him to know that the problem had already been solved, if it wasn't for the fact that the solution was destined to be held up in a contraflow on the T93 on the outskirts of Agincourt, finally arriving too late to be of any relevance, and being swept back into the stream of traffic. The only person who derived any benefit at all from the whole fiasco was the Flying Dutchman, who sold his ship, bought a set of spanners and a small yellow van, and is now doing a roaring trade as a breakdown service. Staff closed the door and threw his raincoat over the back of a chair. It had been a really, really long day. Senior members of the administration are expected to live close to the central office complex, unless they're extremely lucky, like Ganga, for example, who was able to wangle a long lease of a houseboat moored on the left bank of the Styx. This means a tiny little flat in one of the 5 labyrinthine complexes that were built on the site of the old dockyards. For your premium of 1 billion cruisers and your 50,000 cruisers a year ground rent and service charge, you get windows that don't open, lifts that don't work, and condensation you could swim in. There are no roof gardens or window boxes, but if you had a horticultural streak, there's always the mould on the curtains. On the doormat, there were 3 envelopes. Staff picked them up, poured himself a stiff shot of distilled water, and sat down in the one chair that space permitted in his living room. The first letter was junk mail from the United Perpetual Bank, offering him a discount on eternal life insurance and a credit card supposedly accepted by 5 million religions cosmos-wide. For an extra 60,000 cruises a month, the United Perpetual people would be delighted to allow him to participate in their Special Select Reserve Pension Fund, which was guaranteed tax-free owing to its registered office being situated in the eye of the beholder. If his application form was received within 7 days, they'd even give him a free radio alarm clock. Narrator's note, age, remember that when it was the height of kind of wonder that you'd get a free radio alarm clock with something. Like they were like the height of technology and they were expenses of all hell. I remember going to a department store like with me mum for my birthday present, which was a digital radio alarm clock. You look at it now, they probably cost about 5p down at the market, But for me, that was something immense. It was a digital radio alarm clock. I really need to get a life. The second letter was from the compilers of a publication called Truly Important People of Yesterday, and he was warmly invited to complete the enclosed personal biographical questionnaire in order that his biography could be included in the next edition, along with 190 million other truly important people who the publishers reckoned were good for the 2,000 cruisers they were charging per copy. He binned that one too. The third one he had saved till last, because it looked really important. For a start, the address was handwritten, and his name was spelt correctly. He slipped his finger under the flap and pulled, and a moment later Ganga jumped out, landed heavily on all fours on the carpet, and sat up, massaging his neck. Before you say anything, he said, "No, I don't think I'm getting paranoid about making sure we aren't seen together. Maybe I'm a touch overcautious, but there's no point in taking silly risks." Staff frowned. Entrusting oneself to the local postal system, which had the tendency to send all letters to a distant galaxy on principle, narrators know that sounds exactly like my one, seemed to him to be the silliest risk going. "Now you're here," he said, "can we get on with it? Only I've got a lot of ironing to catch up on, and—" Ganga stared at him incredulously. "Ironing?" Staff flushed. "Yes," he snapped, "ironing, and there's the kitchen floor to wash." From where he was sitting, Ganga could see the kitchen, and it struck him that it was so small you could clean it very quickly just by spilling your drink. He confined himself to raising an eyebrow. "OK," he said, "I'll cut away to the main frame, shall I? It's vitally important to the entire future of the cosmos that we go for pizza." Staff blinked. "I see," he said. "Vitally important. Vitally. Who's paying?" "I am." A smile like, well, in the circumstances, not like the sun emerging from behind a cloud, like something equally life-enhancing but without the overtones, flicked across Staff's face and earthed itself in his collar. "Done with you," he said. "Eh? So Bjorn's gone sideways, and Ganga and Staff are going to go for pizza, and, well, where's Jean? Last we saw of her, she was in a helicopter going up the T9. So, tune in for the next episode 16 of Here Comes the Sun by Tom Holt in the next couple of days, I hope." Well, I hope it's going to be in the next couple of days. As I said, I've got this new recording set up. I do have an appointment tomorrow morning at the dentist, so I should be able to record tomorrow afternoon, I hope. Well, for this chapter anyway. I do have a very exciting project coming up, which I'm looking forward to, but that's in my audiobook narrations. We're obviously chatting in the comments. Obviously, it's not obviously, but I'm so sorry if I keep saying obviously, when it's not really. Things are never that obvious unless they're like right up in your face. But so in the comments, we've been having discussions about books to do this year, which I really should have planned late last year, but well, you know, life. So obviously, Terry Pratchett is an absolute legend. I could not do it the amount of justice that Harebear could. I really couldn't, you know. And also I find that on, you know, this particular platform, you've got to make sure that you're not. I couldn't give it the same kind of like variance as I do with Tom Holt. I'm more familiar with Tom Holt than Terry Pratchett, although I am very familiar with Terry Pratchett. But as I said, I think sometimes you have authors that you can really emulate and you can, you know, put your own perspective and spin on something. But I don't think I'll be able to do the justice on Pratchett, to be honest. I do want to do a couple of more ranking books this year. That would be awesome. There's another suggestion as well from our Time Lord, and I want to look into that as well. I need to research that and see what's going on. But as ever, please just if you want to suggest any Tom Holt books as well, like we've got to do 1 or 2 Tom Holt books this year. That'd be fantastic. I'm thinking The Flying Dutchman, to be honest. But if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Or Overtime's quite funny. But again, please let me know. My Hero is one of my favourites. Like, My Hero is right up there. And I'm not sure if I've done it. I think I have. Sorry, I'm really whiffling on today. I do apologise. It's just been one of those weeks. And the thing is, this doesn't just carry over on here, but I'm also going to be using my Substack as well. and I want to kind of like branch out and do things that are a bit different. Like, so of course I want to work with submissions I've had from you guys. I want to work with submissions that I've been kind of pondering on, and to create kind of like a space there as well. Of course, I'm not going to be doing memberships or anything like that, because at the end of the day, we've got our little community, and I love our community. It's absolutely wonderful. And outside of this, I don't know. I don't know what I could. I mean, I don't think anybody wants to have emojis or you know, a pre-show or after show or anything like that. It's just, that's kind of like for the bigger accounts. You know, I'm only a little kind of like account that just likes to read books and talk about books and books and books and books and cats and life and dogs and stuff and everything. But yes, I've gone off on another little tangent, off and away. So what I will do then, my lovelies, and songs, of course. I need to get back into the songs, jolly up that spirit. It has been a really rough year, but this year's going to be definitely a challenge, but definitely we're going to make it everything we want it to be. Like every year we should, and bloody 2 fingers up to the challenges out there. Maybe 2 fingers or 4 fingers, depending on what you prefer to do. You know, you might shake a fist with a stern look. Nah. Okay, my lovely beans, thank you for your time and for listening and for being here. And as I said, please let me know you're okay. If you just, as I said, if you just want to put an emoji in, that's fine. If you want to leave a comment, that's fine. If you want to send an email, that's fine. Anything that works for you. If you want to hit the like button, if it was a good chapter, let me know what you think about the sound quality, if it's any different, if you notice any difference, if it's better, worse, back to front and sideways. But yes, if you could hit the notifications bell if you haven't already, share, subscribe, like, blah-de-da. Got to keep them hamsters happy. They're back from holidays and they're aggy. So if you're cold, wrap up warm. If you're too hot, hydrate. But most of all, stay safe, pedal. And I'll talk to you soon.